American President Joe Biden held a summit for leaders of the world on climate change. Scott Morrison showed up, and like an ungrateful dinner guest, he brought nothing, then complained about what others had brought to the table. So grab a fork and knife and join us as we dive into this hot mess and unpack Australia's climate diplomacy and lack of policies. Hi, my name's Richie Merzian. I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director here at the Australia Institute, and welcome to our new show. The biggest story this week in the climate change world was President Biden's climate summit that occurred Thursday night for us. And Prime Minister Morrison was preparing for it all week. There were speeches to the Business Council where he slagged off almost anyone who lives in the city. There were announcements for more technology funding that somehow would still go to supporting fossil fuels in order to bury their emissions, a technology that has failed and failed and failed despite over $1.3 billion of your money going towards that. Then, of course, there was the big night. And for those who didn't stay up late to watch it, let me just share with you what happened. You had President Biden open it with scenes of space and human advancement and targets being set and people all working together in the same boat. And you had 20 world leaders take the stage before Scott Morrison, probably by design. I don't think the US was that keen to hear from Scott Morrison, who didn't bring anything new to the table. You had Bhutan in front of him, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, a whole variety of countries, Argentina, who aren't necessarily climate champions, or necessarily large economies, but got a higher billing. But shortly after midnight, Scott Morrison took the floor. And when eventually his microphone worked and he realized that he was going live to millions and millions of people, he started by basically slagging them off, saying, "We've been doing better than most of you because we actually deliver on what we promise." Flagging that we don't promise much and therefore it's easy for us to deliver. He then went on to reel off a whole bunch of Australian companies that apparently are leading the way, but are also the highest emitting companies in Australia and are pretty much part of the problem, not necessarily part of the solution. He reeled off a whole bunch of statistics that don't stack up against UN accounting frameworks. He claimed emissions are down 19% while cherry picking that number in the middle of the pandemic. He claimed somehow that we can carve out all the emissions that are involved in all the coal and gas we export and produce here in Australia. That somehow that's not our responsibility, that we crack open new gas fields and all these emissions come up, or that we open up new coal mines and all these emissions. He said somehow that's not our problem. That's not our responsibility. And if you don't look at that, we're doing all right. Let's remember, Australia is the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world, the largest coal exporter, the largest liquefied natural gas exporter, only after Russia and Saudi Arabia. The actual emissions involved in all these exports are more than twice the size of what we're responsible for here. So Australia has a huge carbon footprint and therefore a huge opportunity to turn that around. But you didn't hear that during Scott Morrison's speech. Instead, you heard him talk up Alan Finkel, who works for him, like as if the world is supposed to know who Alan Finkel is. Most Australians don't know who Alan Finkel is. He was the chief scientist, which basically means he worked for Morrison and sold Morrison's approach to climate change, which has pretty much been do as little as possible. And why do as little as possible? Because he wants to keep Australia heavily involved in the fossil fuel industry. It's why Scott Morrison hired so many gas executives to lead the economic recovery. It's why he appointed more gas executives to the Climate Change Authority. This is not a government that actually wants to take climate change seriously. If it did, it wouldn't have slagged off all the countries that spoke before it and brought new pledges. Because what Scott Morrison said is, promises don't matter, pledges don't matter. That's what the US did. They started it off by saying, we are going to massively increase our efforts. We'll be halving our greenhouse gas emissions in the next 10 years. Because the next 10 years is the decisive decade. That is the decade that everyone has to up their ambition. And what does Scott Morrison do? He pretends like that's not important. He says, promises don't matter. Canada and Japan, listen, they increased their efforts. Korea and India, they went into partnership with the US on a whole bunch of new initiatives, but Australia, no. Australia is more interested in pretending like it can bury its head in the ground and keep digging up and exporting fossil fuels, and that's all good. Well, change is coming, and it's either going to disrupt Australia or we can benefit from it. And what we want to see here at the Australia Institute is for Australia to benefit from it. There is no gas-fired recovery. In fact, the gas industry let go of 10% of its workforce in the last year. So it's only a gas-fired recovery in the sense that it's gas firing. There is no major boom that's going to happen for fossil fuels. The three countries that take most of our fossil fuels, China, South Korea, and Japan, have all actually committed to net zero by 2050 or 2060 targets, which means they're going to phase down the importation of our fossil fuels. Other trading partners like Europe are going to tax our goods that come there that are high in carbon. So the Prime Minister can talk all he wants about technology, not taxes, but the taxes are coming, they'll just come from outside. When the Prime Minister needs something good to talk about, he says, oh, but we have the highest uptake of solar rooftop PV in the world. We're doing excellent for renewable energy investment per capita. That's all despite the federal government, not because of it. It's because of state governments, it's because of corporations, it's because people want panels on their roofs. It's not because of the federal government that tried to kill off the renewable energy target, tried to kill off our renewable energy agencies. He ended it by saying, future generations will thank us. I'm not sure what future generations he's talking about, because if this is the measure of Australia's leadership, well, then we're all in serious trouble.